The Xerion command spire pulsed with the slow, rhythmic glow of dying light. Commander Xerwind stood motionless at the observation platform, his emerald-scaled fingers resting against the organic lattice of the viewport. Below him, the last of his people moved through the vine, choked corridors of their once great city ship, their bioluminescent markings dimmed by exhaustion. The air hummed with the low, mournful resonance of their photosynthetic reactors, energy fading, life dwindling. They had been hunted. For cycles, the Krixis Swarm had descended upon Xerion colonies like a tide of razored shadows, their biomechanical dreadnoughts stripping worlds bare. The Galactic Accord had watched, then withdrawn, declaring the Xerion non-essential to the balance. Too peaceful, too weak. A species that had never raised a weapon in anger now faced extinction because they had never learned to hate. Ursek, the lead scientist, approached, his frilled crest drooping with fatigue. His voice was a whisper, barely audible over the ship's weakening pulse. The last broadcast has been sent. Commander, the Accord has blocked all known frequencies, but we rerouted through the dead zones, unfiltered, untraceable. If anyone is listening. Xerwind did not answer. His gaze remained fixed on the void beyond the viewport, where the Krixis armada loomed like a storm of thorns. Their ships were jagged, asymmetrical horrors, their hulls grown from harvested metals and the corpses of conquered species. The swarm did not communicate. They did not negotiate. They consumed. And now, they had come for the last of the Xerion. Ursek hesitated, then dared to voice the thought neither of them could escape. What if no one answers? Xerwind exhaled, his bioluminescence flickering. The question was irrelevant. They had no other options. Elsewhere, in the dark between stars, something stirred. The human vessel UNS Vanguard drifted in silent patrol along the fringes of explored space, its angular hull a stark contrast to the organic flow of Xerion architecture. Inside, Major Rebecca Weir monitored the comms array, her fingers pausing over a scrolling line of static. But unmistakably artificial, Sergeant McKay leaned over her shoulder, his brow furrowing. That's not any encryption we know. Weir didn't reply immediately. The signal was strange, pulsing in irregular bursts, almost like a heartbeat. It wasn't a distress call, it was a plea. She played it. The voice that crackled through the speakers was alien, layered with harmonics no human throat could replicate. The words were unintelligible, but the meaning was clear in the way the pitch rose and fell. Desperation, sorrow, resignation. McKay exhaled sharply. They're losing. Weir's fingers tightened around the edge of the console. Humanity had only recently breached interstellar travel, still newcomers to a galaxy that had long since drawn its battle lines. They had no allies, no obligations, but they had never been good at ignoring a cry for help. She turned to McKay, her voice quiet. Get command on the line. The sergeant hesitated. Major, we don't even know who they are. Weir's gaze didn't waver. Doesn't matter. Somewhere in the dark, the last of the Xerion waited. And against all logic, against all reason, humanity answered. The Xerion command spire pulsed with the slow, sickly glow of a dying star. Xerwind stood motionless in the war chamber, his emerald-hued skin dulled by exhaustion, his elongated fingers tracing the holographic display of their last remaining stronghold. The projections flickered, fractured data streams, half-formed tactical readouts, the jagged edges of a civilization collapsing in real time. They had been precise, they had been logical, and it hadn't mattered. Across the chamber, Ursek adjusted the bioluminescent filaments of the comm array, his movements stiff with resignation. The air smelled of scorched organic circuitry, the acrid tang of their living technology failing cell by cell. They've adapted, Xerwind said, voice low. Ursek didn't look up. They always do. The enemy, the Keth, had torn through the Xerion's defenses, like a storm through brittle reeds. Their tactics were erratic, unpredictable, shifting mid-battle in ways that defied all known military doctrine. Xerion's strategy was built on harmony, on patterns as elegant as the growth rings of their bioships. The Keth fought like wildfire, and now only this spire remained. Xerwind's secondary eyelids flicked shut for a moment, shielding his amber eyes from the harsh glow of the failing systems. He had sent the broadcast on a whim, a final act of defiance flung into the void. No one would answer. The galactic powers had already withdrawn, their alliances dissolving the moment the Keth's brutality became undeniable. Why would anyone come for us? A chime echoed through the chamber, soft, dissonant. Ursek's head snapped up, his bioluminescent veins flaring in surprise. The holographic display shuddered, then resolved into a shape Xerwind had never seen before. Alien, a vessel of gray, black alloy, its hull studded with weapon ports, its silhouette sharp as a blade. Xerwind's breath caught. He had studied the newcomers from afar, dismissed them as primitive, their technology crude compared to the living architectures of the galaxy's elder races. But this ship, this was no primitive construct. It radiated menace, a predator coiled in the dark. Ursek exhaled, his voice barely audible. "They're hailing us." Xerwind hesitated. The humans had no reason to intervene. No treaties bound them. No debts existed to call in. And yet, the calm crackled. A voice, rough, edged, and unmistakably human, cut through the static. "This is Major Weir of the UEFE Indomitable. We received your signal." A pause, then words that shattered Xerwind's understanding of the universe. "Hold on, we're coming in." The transmission ended. Ursek's fingers trembled against the console. "They can't possibly." Xerwind stared at the hologram, at the warship hanging motionless against the void. The humans had no patterns, no predictability, and for the first time in cycles, he felt something like hope. The Keth had never fought anything like them before. The Xerion command deck pulsed with uneasy light, the organic amber glow of the walls flickering in time with the crew's racing heartbeats. Xerwind's talons flexed against the spongy surface of the command console, his mind racing through tactical simulations that all ended the same way: annihilation. The Keth fleet loomed on the long-range scans, their biomechanical dreadnoughts unfolding, like predatory flowers, their photosynthetic energy webs flaring as they prepared to fire. Ursek's tendrils twitched in agitation as he studied the human warship's approach. The Indomitable moved unlike any vessel he had ever seen. Galactic doctrine dictated clean, efficient vectors, minimal energy expenditure, optimal firing angles. But the human ship drifted, its thrusters firing in erratic bursts, its trajectory a chaotic spiral that defied all logic. "They're wasting fuel," Ursek muttered, his voice thick with disbelief. "Their path makes no tactical sense." Xerwind's secondary eyelids flicked shut for a moment, recalibrating his vision to the absurdity unfolding before him. The human vessel wasn't just moving unpredictably, it was taunting the Keth. It veered into their weapons' optimal firing range, then twisted away at the last possible moment, forcing the enemy to constantly adjust. The Keth's elegant, synchronized formations faltered, their energy signatures spiking in frustration. Then the human ship did something impossible. It stopped, dead in space, engines cold, no active countermeasures. A perfect, motionless target. Ursek's breath caught. "They're dead. They've just committed suicide." Xerwind's instinct screamed at him to look away. No species could survive such recklessness. But then the Keth opened fire. A storm of yellow-green plasma lances streaked toward the Indomitable, enough firepower to crack a planet's crust. The humans didn't evade. They didn't raise shields. They let it hit them. The explosion should have vaporized them. Instead, the plasma dispersed in a shimmering aurora around the human ship's hull, its energy siphoned away by some unseen system. The Indomitable remained untouched, its dark silhouette wreathed in fading emerald fire. A new transmission crackled through. "Keth Fleet," came Major Weir's voice, calm as a surgeon's scalpel. "That was your one free shot." Then the human ship moved, not with the graceful arcs of Xerion vessels, but with a brutal mechanical certainty. Thrusters flared, and the Indomitable accelerated straight into the heart of the Keth formation, its weapon systems humming to life. Air-6 tendrils coiled tight. They lured them. Xerwind understood now. The erratic path, the feigned vulnerability, none of it had been incompetence. It had been calculation. The humans had studied the Keth's rigid doctrine, their reliance on perfect firing solutions, and then they had broken it. The Keth, masters of orderly warfare, had no answer for an enemy that fought like a storm. And as the Indomitable tore into them, its railguns roaring, its point, defense systems shredding Keth fighters like chaff, Xerwind felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. Not just hope. The Keth fleet recoiled like a wounded beast, their formation fracturing under the Indomitable's assault. Xerwind watched, his bioluminescent veins pulsing erratically, as the human warship carved through the enemy lines with terrifying efficiency. It wasn't just the firepower, though that alone was staggering. It was the way they fought. Keth doctrine demanded precision, symmetry, the cold calculus of optimal engagement vectors. The humans ignored all of it. Their maneuvers were brutal, unpredictable, their ship pivoting on axes, no Xerion or Keth navigator would ever consider. They fired railgun salvos into empty space, only for Keth interceptors to blunder into the projectiles seconds later, as if the humans had known where they would be before they did. Arsek's tendrils trembled as he analyzed the data streams. Their predictive algorithms, they don't just account for our tactics, they account for our mistakes. Xerwind's secondary heart stuttered. That was the horror of it. The Keth had spent centuries perfecting their strategies, refining them into an unbreakable system. The humans had spent the same amount of time studying how to shatter systems. Then the Keth flagship, the Dagger of Supremacy, did something Xerwind had never seen in 3 decades of warfare. It broadcast a surrender. The signal pulsed across the comms, a formal request for ceasefire, laced with the unmistakable harmonics of Keth's submission. Xerwind's instincts screamed. The Keth did not surrender. Ever. Ursek's voice was a whisper. "It's a trap." The humans knew. Major Weir's voice crackled through the bridge speakers, utterly calm. "Sergeant McKay, status on the boarding pods." A gruff response, locked and loaded. "Major, just waiting for the go." Xerwind's tendrils stiffened. Boarding pods. The Indomitable hadn't launched anything. Then the Keth flagship's hull ruptured, not from an external attack. From within, a dozen armored pods, each the size of a Xerion shuttle, tore free from concealed compartments along the Indomitable's underbelly. They streaked toward the Dagger of Supremacy, their thrusters burning white, hot slamming into the Keth vessel's weakened shield points with surgical precision. The Keth had expected a feigned surrender to lure the humans into range of their hidden weaponry. The humans had let them think that. Now, as the boarding pods disgorged their payload, black armored figures wielding weapons that hummed with restrained violence, Xerwind understood the true depth of human warfare. They didn't just break rules, they rewrote them. And as the first human exotrooper breached the Keth bridge, its visor reflecting the terrified faces of the enemy command staff, Xerwind felt something primal uncoil in his chest, because for the first time in his life, he was glad, truly glad, that these monsters were on his side. The Dagger of Supremacy burned, not with the clean, controlled fury of Xerion bio, plasma, or the elegant disintegration of Keth singularity weapons, but with the ugly, thrashing violence of human warfare. Flames licked through ruptured decks. Fed by oxygen, rich atmospherics, the Keth had never thought to purge. Smoke curled in thick choking tendrils, obscuring the once pristine command nexus where Xerion and Keth alike now lay broken. Xerwind watched through the flickering holofeed as the human exotroopers advanced. Their movements were wrong. Not the fluid, predatory grace of Keth's shock troops or the methodical precision of Xerion enforcers, but something jagged, unpredictable. They didn't clear rooms in orderly sweeps. They flooded them, breaching from multiple angles at once, their weapons barking in staccato bursts that left no time for counterfire. One of them, taller than the rest, its armor scored with fresh battle damage, paused beside a fallen Keth officer. For a heartbeat, Xerwind thought it might offer mercy. Then it crushed the Keth skull with a single, casual stomp. Ersic made a sound beside him, something between a gasp and a whimper. The scientist's frill membranes had clamped tight against his neck. His bioluminescence dimmed to a sickly pulse. "They're butchers," he whispered. Xerwind said nothing, because he had seen the data streams. He knew what the Keth had planned for Xerion Prime. Genocide, not conquest, not subjugation, eradication, down to the last sporling in the nursery vaults. The Keth hadn't even bothered to hide it. Their transmission logs were full of tactical assessments detailing the optimal atmospheric toxins to deploy, the most efficient patterns of orbital bombardment, and the humans. They had intercepted those same logs. Now they moved through the dagger like a force of nature, their weapons speaking in a language the Keth finally understood. You should have surrendered when you had the chance. A new alert chimed, a priority signal from the human flagship. The holofeed dissolved, replaced by the sharp-featured face of Major Rebecca Weir. Her dark eyes gleamed with something that wasn't quite triumph. Xerwind, no title, no honorific, just his name, spoken like the blade of a knife. Your people have a choice. Behind her, the tactical display updated in real time. The Keth fleet, once a glittering swarm of dominance, now flickered red as human hunter. Killer drones picked them apart. "You can stand with us," Weir said, "or you can stand aside." Xerwind felt the weight of centuries of Xerion doctrine pressing down on him. Never trust outsiders. Never rely on another species' strength. But doctrine hadn't saved them, the humans had. He straightened, his frill flaring in the old warrior's salute. "We stand with you." Weir's lips curled, not a smile, but the baring of teeth. Good, the feed cut. Outside, the void lit up with the dying screams of Keth warships. Section Fae. The unreadable code Ursic's neural tendrils pulsed with exhaustion as she bent over the bioluminescent data streams, her emerald fingers tracing patterns in the air. The command chamber hummed with the low organic thrum of Xerion technology, living consoles breathing in sync with the ship's pulse, veins of yellow-green energy threading through the walls like illuminated roots. She had spent cycles dissecting the Keth's encrypted battle signals, their logic as rigid and predictable as crystalline growth. But the human transmissions, they made no sense. Ursic's frill twitched in frustration. The signals were chaos, bursts of static, fragmented harmonics, even what sounded like laughter spliced between targeting coordinates. She had isolated 3 layers of encryption, only to find a 4th beneath it. This one woven with what her translator insisted was human poetry. The fog of war is just smoke waiting for a spark. A Keth cryptologist would have torn their sensory horns out in rage. Ursic exhaled, her bioluminescent markings dimming with fatigue. She had expected mathematical ciphers, frequency, hopping algorithms, not this. Artistic insanity. Across the chamber, Xerwind stood motionless, his armored carapace reflecting the battle, unfolding beyond the organic viewport. The Keth armada, once a flawless lattice of destruction, now burned in jagged arcs across the void. Human hunter. Drones moved among them like wolves, their thrusters flaring crimson as they herded the enemy into kill zones that shouldn't have existed. Ursic's tendrils stiffened. That was the other impossibility. Human tactics were fluid, shifting from disciplined formations to frenzied, individual strikes without warning. Their ships didn't just break Keth formations, they redefined them, turning the enemy's own maneuvers into traps. A new signal blared across her console. A Keth distress call, choked with interference. Cannot triangulate. Their ships are static. Then, a human voice, calm and amused. Yeah, we get that a lot. Airsick's frill flared in realization. The humans weren't just encrypting their communications. They were weaponizing confusion. Every broken signal, every nonsensical transmission. It was deliberate. The Keth relied on order, on predictable patterns honed over millennia of dominance. But humans fought like the storms of their homeworld. Unpredictable, relentless, turning chaos into a blade. Xerwind turned, his amber eyes reflecting the dying Keth ships. You understand them now, he said. Not a question. Ursek let her neural tendrils curl in something between awe and dread. No, she admitted. But I understand why the Keth are losing. Outside, the void burned brighter. The void between stars was never truly silent. Xerwind knew this, had known it since his first deep space patrol, when the whispers of cosmic radiation had hummed against his ship's bio. Sensors like the murmurs of some ancient, indifferent god. But now, as he watched the remnants of the Keth Armada burn, he realized he had never truly heard the void until the humans had filled it with their madness. Their fleet moved like a living thing. No, like many living things. Each vessel a predator with its own rhythm, its own instincts. There was no formation, no rigid hierarchy of command. Instead, they swarmed, shifting and reforming in patterns that made his neural tendrils ache with the effort of comprehension. Ursek's voice crackled through the calm, her usually measured tones frayed at the edges. Their maneuvers, they don't follow any known tactical doctrine. It's as if they're improvising. Xerwind's claws flexed against the organic control panel, its pulsing yellow-green light staining his scales. Improvising. The word was too small, too tame for what he was witnessing. The Keth had been the masters of war for cycles beyond counting. Their strategies were mathematical perfection, their fleets moving with the precision of a celestial clockwork. And yet, a human frigate, its hull scarred and scorched, spun wildly between two Keth destroyers, venting atmosphere in a deliberate spiraling plume. The Keth sensors locked onto the debris, interpreting it as a crippled vessel drifting helplessly. Then the frigate fired, its railguns punching through the destroyer's exposed flanks in the exact moment. Their shields flickered to adjust for the wreckage. Xerwind's frill flattened against his skull. It wasn't improvisation. It was theater. Every erratic movement, every seemingly desperate broadcast, every flicker of their erratic energy signatures, all of it was a performance, a script written in a language the Keth couldn't read. The humans weren't just fighting, they were telling a story, and the Keth were dying because they kept believing the wrong chapters. Ursek's tendrils lashed behind her as she parsed another burst of human comm traffic, a garbled, laughing transmission, half sung, half static. Dance with me, you overgrown calculators. The Keth command ship, a leviathan of gleaming black alloy, shuddered as a swarm of human drones latched onto its hull. They didn't attack. Not yet. They crawled, skittering like insects, their movements too fast, too alive for the Keith targeting systems to track. Xerwind understood, then, why the humans had no need for the orderly, luminous beauty of Xerion biotech. Their machines didn't pulse with energy. They thrashed, they gnawed. And when the drones finally detonated, it wasn't in a single, catastrophic blast. It was in a chain reaction of precisely timed explosions, each one weaker than the last, just enough to fracture the Keth ship's spine in a dozen places, leaving it writhing in the void, like a beast with a severed spinal cord. Ursek made a sound no Xerion throat should have been capable of producing. They're not targeting the engines or the weapons there, targeting the crew. Xerwind finished, his voice hollow. The humans didn't just want to win. They wanted the Keth to understand they had lost. Outside, the void burned brighter. Ursic's fingers trembled over the console, the normally steady glow of Xerion bio, circuits flickering erratically under his touch. The data streams pulsed in jagged, frantic waves, yellow-green fractals of information collapsing into nonsense. His mind, trained for decades in the precise calculus of war, could not reconcile what he was seeing. The human weapon made no sense. It was small, insignificant, a blunt, unadorned cylinder of dull metal, ejected from one of their smaller vessels like discarded refuse. No energy signature, no guidance systems, no telltale thrum of contained destruction. Just inert mass, tumbling lazily toward the crippled Keth dreadnought. Ursic's secondary eyelids flicked shut in reflexive confusion. This was their answer. After the surgical brutality of their drones, after the terrifying precision of their boarding swarms, this, a rock. Xerwind's voice crackled through the comms, strained with something between disbelief and dawning horror. Ursic, analyze it. He already was. His scanners swept over the object again and again, probing for hidden mechanisms, for some trick of human engineering he had missed. Nothing. No plasma core, no antimatter containment, not even a primitive chemical payload, just cold, dead metal. It's inert, he reported, the words tasting wrong. No detectable energy, no moving parts, it shouldn't. The weapon struck the Keth hull. For one impossible second, nothing happened. Then the dreadnought screamed. Not metaphorically, not the groaning of stressed metal or the hiss of ruptured conduits. The ship itself wailed, a sound that vibrated through the void, transmitted not through air but through the shuddering distortion of space-time. The Keth vessels were biomechanical, grown rather than built, their systems interlaced with neural webbing. And now that webbing was burning. Ursic's screens erupted with warnings. The human weapon wasn't explosive, it wasn't radioactive, it was resonant. The cylinder had shattered on impact, releasing a storm of vibrations tuned to a frequency the Keth ships could not endure. Their organic infrastructure convulsed, veins of photosynthetic energy bursting like overripe fruit. The dreadnought's outer hull rippled, then peeled apart in great gelatinous sheets, exposing pulsing innards to the vacuum. Ursic's breath caught. The humans hadn't just built a weapon. They had built a torture device, one that turned the Keth's own biology against them. Xerwind's voice was a whisper. They knew. Of course they knew. The humans had studied their enemies, dissected their weaknesses with the same ruthless efficiency they applied to everything. And then, with terrifying pragmatism, they had engineered a weapon that was useless against anyone, except the Keth. Ursic's claws dug into his console, the smooth bio, metal yielding under the pressure. He had spent his life perfecting weapons of radiant destruction, beams of searing light, missiles that bloomed like poisonous flowers, elegant, predictable. This was neither. The humans had looked at the pinnacle of Xerion war science and laughed. Why waste energy, they seemed to say, when all you need is the right note. Outside, the Keth fleet was coming apart like rotten fruit in a gale. And the humans hadn't even fired a second shot. The bridge of the Indomitable was silent. Not the quiet of a lull in battle, nor the tense stillness before an order was given. This was the silence of a predator that had just watched its prey collapse mid-chase, unnerved by how easy it had been. Major Rebecca Weir stood at the tactical display, her fingers resting lightly on the edge of the console. The holographic projection flickered with the dying signals of the Keth fleet, their ship spiraling out of formation like leaves in a storm. One shot, that was all it had taken. One shot from a weapon the Xerions hadn't even known existed. She exhaled, slow and controlled. Behind her, Sergeant Cameron McKay shifted his weight, his armor creaking faintly. He didn't speak. None of them did. The crew had expected a fight, a brutal grinding exchange of fire, the kind of battle that left scars on ships and souls alike. Instead, they had unleashed something that didn't feel like war. It felt like a trick, Ursik, the Xerion scientist, stood frozen at his station, his emerald-hued fingers twitching over the bio-luminescent interface. His mind raced, replaying the last few minutes in jagged fragments. The humans had known the Keth's biology, their neural frequencies, the precise resonance that would turn their nervous systems into weapons against themselves. It wasn't just a victory, it was a mockery of everything the Keth, and by extension, the Xerions understood about warfare. Xerwind, the Xerion commander, finally broke the silence. His voice was a low, pulsing hum, the sound of organic energy circuits cycling down. You planned this. Weir didn't turn. We studied. Ursik's frill flared, the bioluminescent patterns along his neck flickering in agitation. This was not study. This was dissection. The Major's lips thinned. She had expected awe, maybe even gratitude. Instead, she saw something far more dangerous in the Xerion's eyes. Fear. Not of the Keth, of her, of what humanity had just revealed itself capable of. She had known this moment would come. The Indomitable wasn't just a warship, it was a laboratory. Every engagement, every skirmish, every intercepted transmission had been another data point. Another piece of the puzzle fed into the machine. The humans hadn't just fought the Keth, they had taken them apart, molecule by molecule, until they found the one weakness that couldn't be shielded against. And now the Xerions understood. Weir turned, finally meeting Xerwind's gaze. You asked why we didn't use this sooner. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. It only works once. Ursik's breath hitched. The Keth would adapt. They would shield against the frequency, armor their ships against the resonance. But by then, it wouldn't matter. The humans had already won. Not just the battle, but the war of ideas. They had proven, in one brutal stroke, that they could turn the galaxy's most feared warriors into helpless prey, and the Xerions would never look at them the same way again. McKay shifted again, his hand drifting toward his sidearm out of habit. He had seen that look before, on the faces of insurgents, of warlords, of men who realized too late that they were outmatched. It wasn't just fear, it was recognition. The humans didn't fight fair, and that was why they always won. The silence in the command chamber was thick enough to suffocate. Xerwind's bioluminescent veins pulsed erratically, casting flickering emerald shadows across the organic walls of the Xerion flagship. The air smelled of ozone and something else, something sharp and metallic, like the aftertaste of lightning. Ursik stood frozen beside him, his frilled neck membranes flaring in distress. The Keth armada had been reduced to drifting husks, their once terrifying warships, now nothing more than derelict tombs. The humans had done it. They had won, and yet, Xerwind felt no relief, only a deep, gnawing unease. The humans had not fought as warriors. They had not dueled with honor, had not matched strength against strength. They had cheated, and that terrified him more than the Keth ever had. Across the chamber, Major Weir was speaking quietly with Sergeant McKay, her fingers tracing the holographic readouts of the battlefield. Her posture was relaxed, almost casual, as if she hadn't just rewritten the rules of war in a single stroke. McKay, by contrast, was coiled tight, his gaze flicking between the Xerions and the wreckage beyond the viewports. He had seen this reaction before, the disbelief, the dawning horror. Xerwind's mandibles twitched. The humans had known. They had known how this would look, how it would feel, and they had done it anyway. Ursik finally broke the silence, his voice a whisper. You knew they wouldn't see it coming. Weir didn't look up. We knew. But Ursik's frills trembled. The Keth have fought 1,000 species. They have faced every weapon, every tactic. How could they not have? Because it doesn't make sense. McKay cut in, his voice rough. No one builds a weapon that only works once. No one throws away their best shot on a single battle. He exhaled sharply. That's why it worked. Xerwind's mind reeled. The humans had not just outmaneuvered the Keth, they had outthought them. They had weaponized illogic, turned unpredictability into a blade, and now the Keth would spend the next century fortifying against a tactic that would never be used again. It was madness. It was brilliance, and it left Xerwind with a single, inescapable truth. The humans were not just dangerous. They were terrifying. Weir finally turned, her gaze locking onto Xerwind's. There was no gloating in her expression, no triumph, only a quiet, relentless certainty. "You asked why we helped you," she said. "It wasn't just because you asked." Xerwind's pulse thrummed. "It was because no one else would." The words settled like a weight. The Xerions had been abandoned, betrayed, left to die. And yet, from the depths of the void, the humans had answered. Not for glory, not for conquest, but because it was right. Ursek made a soft, shuddering sound. Xerwind could feel the shift in the chamber, the moment the Xerions' fear of humanity twisted into something else, something deeper, something like awe. McKay shifted, his hand resting on the grip of his sidearm. He had seen this before, too. The moment a species realized what humans truly were. Not just survivors, not just warriors, but the ones who would stand when no one else would. That changed everything. The command chamber hummed with the residual energy of the battle, the air thick with the scent of ozone and the faint organic musk of Xerion biotech. The walls pulsed with slow, exhausted light, their usual vibrant yellow-green dimmed to a bruised emerald. Xerwind could still feel the phantom vibrations of the human warship's engines through the deck, a deep, resonant thrum that had shuddered through the Xerion vessel like the heartbeat of some vast, unstoppable beast. Major Weir stood motionless before the viewport, her silhouette framed by the wreckage of the enemy fleet. The remains of the Krixis armada drifted in the void, their once proud vessels reduced to twisted husks, their organic hulls blackened and split like scorched leaves. The humans had not just defeated them. They had annihilated them, and they had done it without hesitation. Xerwind's tendrils twitched, his mind still struggling to reconcile what he had witnessed. The Krixis had been the apex predators of this sector, their tactics honed over centuries of conquest. They did not lose, not like this. Not so utterly, yet the humans had torn through them as if they were nothing. Ursek's voice was barely a whisper. Their maneuvers, they made no sense. McKay snorted, the sound sharp in the quiet. That's the point. Xerwind turned to him, his primary eyes narrowing. Explain. The human sergeant didn't answer immediately. Instead, he tapped a command into his wrist display, pulling up a holographic replay of the battle. The projection flickered to life, casting jagged blue light across the chamber. See this? McKay pointed to a cluster of human fighters breaking formation, spiraling into what should have been a suicidal dive toward the Krixis flagship. Standard doctrine says you hold formation, you maintain firing lines, you retreat when outnumbered. His lips curled. But the Krixis knew that. They expected it, so we didn't. The hologram showed the fighters suddenly veering again, not away, but through the Krixis lines, their weapons firing not at the enemy ships, but at the unstable energy nodes along their hulls. The result was catastrophic. Chain reactions rippled through the Krixis formation, their own power cores turning against them. Ursek's frills flared in shock. You used their technology against them. McKay shrugged. We used everything against them. Weir finally turned from the viewport, her expression unreadable. The Krixis fight by rules, patterns predictable, even in their brutality. She stepped forward, her boots clicking against the deck. Humans don't. Xerwind felt something cold settle in his core. That was the truth of it. The humans did not fight like the Xerions, with their elegant, symbiotic technology. They did not fight like the Krixis, with their relentless, calculated cruelty. They fought like humans, chaotic, adaptive, utterly without restraint. They turned weaknesses into weapons. They saw no line between madness and genius, and they won. Ursek's voice trembled. But why? Why risk yourselves for us? Weir's gaze locked onto his, and for the first time, Xerwind saw something flicker in her eyes. Not pity, not arrogance, but something far more unsettling. Understanding. Because someone has to, she said softly. The words hung in the air, heavier than the silence of the void outside. Xerwind looked down at his own hands, the delicate, luminous veins of his skin pulsing faintly with fading adrenaline. He had spent his life believing strength lay in perfection, in flawless execution, in unbroken harmony. The humans had shown him something else. Strength lay in the willingness to break, to shatter every rule, every expectation, if it meant standing when others fell. That was why they won. The chamber's lights brightened slightly, the Xerion ship systems finally stabilizing. Outside, the human fleet moved into formation, their engines flaring like distant stars. They were not leaving, they were staying. McKay crossed his arms, watching the Xerions with something almost like amusement. So, you gonna thank us, or just keep staring? Xerwind exhaled, his body slowly relaxing. For the first time since the Krixis had come, he felt not fear, not despair, but something else entirely. He straightened, his tendrils lifting in the Xerion equivalent of a nod. Thank you, he said, and meant it. The silence that followed was not the quiet of defeat, nor the hush of exhaustion. It was something new, something alive. Xerwind watched as the human fleet settled into a protective orbit around the crippled Xerion vessels, their ships scarred but unbroken. The Krixis wreckage still smoldered in the void, a graveyard of arrogance. The humans should have left. By every law of war, of survival, they should have taken their victory and vanished into the dark. Instead, they stayed. McKay's grin hadn't faded. He leaned against the console, the flickering light of the view screen casting jagged shadows across his face. Figured you could use a hand cleaning up. A hand, as if this were some minor inconvenience and not the salvation of a species. Xerwind's tendrils coiled tight, then loosened. He had spent cycles studying human behavior, their aggression, their unpredictability, but he had never accounted for this. For the way they fought like demons, then turned around and offered aid without hesitation. Without price, one of the human engineers, small, dark-haired, her sleeves rolled to the elbows, was already elbow deep in the exposed guts of a Xerion power relay, her fingers dancing across the biomechanical circuits with a familiarity that bordered on reverence. Huh, she muttered, half to herself. You guys grow your tech like coral, right? That's wild. Xerwind blinked. No one in the galactic consensus had ever called Xerion technology wild. Advanced, yes. Elegant, certainly, but never with that tone, that raw, unfiltered wonder. And then it struck him. This was not just survival, not just victory. This was contact. The humans weren't just saving them, they were learning them. McKay caught his stare and smirked. What? Never seen someone geek out over alien tech before. Xerwind exhaled, slow and deliberate. No, he admitted, we have not. Beyond the viewport, the first light of the system's star crept over the horizon, painting the wreckage in gold. The night had been long, the dawn was theirs.